Well, Softbank is reportedly in talks to buy the remaining 25% stake in ARM that it doesn't already own through its Vision Fund. Investors in that vehicle include Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. They'll be in for a windfall. That's according to Reuters. All of this according to Reuters. And this comes as ARM is looking to launch its initial public offering at a valuation of reportedly between $60 billion and $70 billion in the coming months. Joining us now is Richard Windsor, Radio Free Mobile founder. Richard, it's good to see you. As investors try to figure out how to invest in the next phase of, say, AI growth or semiconductors broadly, how hot is ARM going to be when it finally does come to market?
Well, this is a really good question, isn't it? One of the problems that Softbank has is that expectations for Softbank owners has been that the sale of ARM would net about $60 to $70 billion from when Nvidia was going to buy it. Now, the problem is that transaction fell through. And then when you actually look at the fundamentals of ARM, you would come up with, on a valuation basis, being quite generous, a number closer to 30. So this is the dilemma that Softbank is facing. And it is quite possible from a cynical point of view to say that most of the actions or maneuvers that it has taken over the last 6 months or so is in an attempt to try and achieve a valuation, build confidence behind ARM to get a valuation of 60 to 70 billion, which is what it needs to achieve.
Would you rather hold ARM or hold perhaps one of the anchor investors? There's a couple big companies that we were just showing our viewers that have some type of exposure into this potential IPO.
Well, when it comes to ARM, it's a question of price, isn't it? Would I consider owning ARM at $30 billion? Quite possibly, yes. Would I consider owning ARM at $60 billion? You'd have to show me something pretty special. So it always comes down to price. If you look at some of the other anchor investors, certainly when it comes to valuation, you could make a case that those potential investors would be trading on a lower multiple relative to ARM, larger, more established businesses that perhaps the anchor investors you'd be better off with.
I think people are trying to figure out if this is an AI play. It doesn't seem to currently be one, but in general, how much should investors be thinking about businesses that the semiconductor makers aren't fully in yet as part of their investment proposition?
Okay. Now, to be absolutely fair to ARM, there is a long-term AI play here. Now, the research that I've done with my company, Radio Free Mobile, on the generative AI strongly implies that when you're running these kinds of generative AI models in the future, you're going to want to do them on device, which is going to be on laptops, on mobile phones, on battery-powered devices. And these devices are all increasingly powered by the ARM intellectual property. So if that prediction comes true in maybe 5 to 6 years or so, ARM is very well positioned. The problem is that if you look at the way stocks trade, then they don't care about 5 years in the future. You miss one set of earnings when you're on 50 times revenues, you're going to take a massive hit on one quarter. And that's the valuation conundrum that I think investors are going to have to face when being asked to cough up 60 to 70 billion on the valuation.
You know, we've had similar questions around whether or not certain companies are actually AI companies. Like, for instance, is Tesla an AI company as much as it might talk about it having AI ambitions or investments? Is Palantir a strictly AI company, especially during this hype phase? And for Palantir, I mean, you've been looking across that as well. Is this an AI company more so than the others that have said we've invested heavily but won't disclose how much they're spending on AI?
Another great question. Palantir is much more exposed to AI than many of the other companies that would lay the same claim. The reason being is that if you look at Palantir just launched a new platform called its AIP. Now, it's not particularly creating generative AI in of itself. What it is doing is giving you the framework by which you can actually deploy it and use it successfully, and they've got a significant advantage over all of its competitors. And this is one of the reasons, full disclosure, in my portfolio, I do own Palantir, and I own it not because it's an AI company. I own it because it has no competition. And from that perspective, that's the kind of company that you want to own.
When you are looking at the AI prospects, though, you have sort of three different points. You call them control points that you're looking for different investments at. Silicon platforms, foundation model, and chatbots. Can you walk us through that as briefly as possible, how to think about each of those?
Yeah, you see, the way it works at the moment is you can break up the artificial intelligence value chain into two main blocks. One is kind of like the silicon training platform block, which is utterly dominated by Nvidia. And then there's the other block, which is kind of like the more software ecosystem. And that's where you find the foundation models. Now, at that end, you find Microsoft and OpenAI. I think about Microsoft and OpenAI as one company because I think that Microsoft will have no choice but to acquire OpenAI at some point. You have Google, and increasingly you have Meta Platforms, which is making a big play through the open source community. And what's happening right now is that when you look at the silicon story, there is only one story, which is Nvidia, and then you have to come to grips with whether or not you think Nvidia's valuation is fair if you're a prospective investor. On the other end, on the other side of the fence, when you look at Microsoft and you look at Meta Platforms and you look at Google, they are all major players in this space. But again, what contribution is generative AI making to their revenues right now? I would hazard it's a tiny, tiny fraction. So again, this is an investment being made all on narrative and very little on substance at this point in time.
What is one of the risks of, or perhaps how you're evaluating the broader global picture around generative AI, considering that there's already certain bars on being able to have certain chips in one country go to another, or even some of the intellectual property overhangs that are going to have to be navigated around in order for generative AI and the companies that power a certain model or solution to even be able to have usership in another part of the world?
Yeah, that is a good question. And at the moment, the way I see generative AI evolving is that a more pressing matter is actually the business model. Now, if you look at the business model of OpenAI with ChatGPT-4, $20 per user per month. If you look at what Microsoft is proposing with Copilot, $30 per user per month. By the way, Microsoft's Copilot is more expensive than actually all of the Office programs put together. And one of the dangers is that if you look across China, if you look in Russia and India, there is a lot of open source activity going on. And these guys are using open source models provided by Meta Platforms to create all kinds of generative AI services. And so what I think is likely to happen is that you're going to get an awful lot of competition. And the net result of that is that $20 per user per month is probably not the right number. It's probably something closer to $20 per user per year. Now, if you look at the valuations people are talking about with all of these startups and the capital is pouring into this sector, these valuations are predicated on that business model of $20 per user per month holding. And I suspect this is when you're going to start to see the first real trouble when it comes to the valuation of these companies. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of value to be created from generative AI. What I am saying is that the generative AI valuations that are being attributed to these companies are significantly overblown.
Well, we'll see if that ends up happening and they do end up coming back down to earth. Richard Windsor, great to get your perspective as always, founder of Radio Free Mobile. Thank you.